everybody, and welcome to another Cyber Lounge webinar. I'm joined this time by Nadine Michaelides from Anima People, and she's going to be talking about cyber awareness campaigns that influence behavior. Nadine, if you'd like to introduce.
Hi. Yes, I'm Nadine Michaelides. I'm a cyber psychologist. I come from a background of stakeholder engagement communications, and in recent years been heavily involved in behavioural research around cybersecurity and information security. So really happy to be with you today and try and share some insights into how to develop some really fantastic, impactful communications campaigns.
That sounds great. She's got some slides that she might want to put up about now. Anyone who has questions for Nadine, be sure to put that in the comments, and we'll get to that towards the end. I'll just put this banner up here. I think we've got the slides there. So yeah, thank you, Nadine, and please begin.
Okay, great, thanks. So there's loads of material out there if you Google it or research online as to how to develop good awareness campaigns, generally speaking, not specific to cybersecurity. But I think the really key thing about cybersecurity is that there's a behavior change that is required as an urgent call to action. It's not something that can develop over many, many years. Many organizations and communities require immediate action. So that's why we really need to look deeply at the psychological side of things to really understand what drives people, what motivates people in delivering and planning and then delivering those campaigns. So, yeah, great. Thank you for all coming today. I saw from the attendee list there's quite an international audience and quite a variety of different expertise and skills. So I'll try and keep this quite light and high level, although we are pulling on some academic research here. So apologies if there's a little bit of terminology here and there, and feel free to contact me at the end or ask any questions if you're a bit unsure about anything. So, many of us assume that by having lots of singing and dancing, resourceful awareness campaigns rolled out across the big organizations, that it's all going to be fantastic, looks great, and it's all going to create this behavior change. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. However, an awareness campaign is crucial in that it is the vehicle for disseminating information that all users need. Some great researchers here, Badasas and Nurse, that's their words from 2019. So, but how successful really are campaigns? I mean, that's the key question that I get asked so many times. So there's been studies out there that have looked at this. They've analysed a variety of different campaigns internationally. So this one particularly analysed 17 government-sponsored cybersecurity campaign materials. And the results were that security campaigns are often focused on education and increasing awareness under the assumption that as long as citizens are aware of the risk and are provided with the information, that will invariably end up in some sort of behavior change. So here we have a table that includes some intervention functions and behavior change techniques that are included in cybersecurity campaigns. Some really great stuff in here. And effectiveness measurements were found in the public sphere for only 2 campaigns, unfortunately. So we've got some, I'm sure there's lots of fantastic, great stuff going on here, but actually only 2 of them were found to be directly effective in changing behavior. The goal is, of course, to increase awareness, but ultimately awareness is not enough. We need to actually change the behavior at the end. So there is no evidence, essentially, that merely increasing awareness leads to behavioural change, which is what I'm trying to get at. So it's important when designing these campaigns that you don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. I know we all try and sort of separate it into different audiences in different markets, but there is this tendency to have a one-size-fits-all approach. Upgrade the awareness campaigns. They focus on specific behaviors and threats. Don't make it too generic. Look at what's happening out there. What are the needs? What are the demands? What are the risks? And create campaigns specifically to those individual risks and needs. Wherever possible, try to avoid targeting the general public and target specific groups of users, for example, cyberbullying. avoid a one-size-fits-all approach, and provide coping skills in how to manage in certain situations. So it's all very well sort of scaring people and telling people about all the risk and the problems and trying to educate them, but ultimately you need to provide them with the tools in order to manage those risks. So what are mental models? Well, they're a set of causal beliefs that a person possesses that he or she uses to guide decisions and behavior. Users have a variety of different models of security threats that make security decisions. This is really, really useful stuff to know if you're in the security industry or communications professional, because if you understand how people tick or the categories that they might sort of stereotypically adopt, then you understand what drives them, what motivates them, what influences them, and the kind of messages that should be appropriate for those sorts of people. So this is a study by Wash and Rader that found that computer users have a variety of mental models, and these mental models are often used to make security decisions. That's not the same as knowledge. They usually represent a sense of causal beliefs, which is really, really important to remember. This is not just about models. This is not just about knowledge. This is about changing beliefs and changing behaviors. So this is about responsibility. So users who feel psychological ownership are more likely to engage in protective measures. So that's really important, that when people take responsibility for security, they are much more likely to actually develop behaviors in the long term that are conducive to cybersecurity. Match an individual self-guide or self-monitoring style. And we need to appreciate the cultural differences between people and how messages are received. There's often an assumption that of this sort of Western way of talking and speaking in English. Well, actually, English isn't always everyone's first language. Culturally, people might perceive different terms in different ways. So understanding those cultural differences is really important when planning these campaigns, especially if we want them to deliver actual behavior change. So not just absorb the information, but actually transfer that into actual long-term behavior change. This is something called the dominant regulatory focus. So it has to feel right to that person in order for them to actually take it on board and change. And what feels right is very different to different people. So there's growing literature on persuasive communication that provides evidence of stronger persuasive effects of messages designed to match the actual individual characteristics of those people and those communities. So persuasion techniques, as I just mentioned, really, really important. They're educational, of course. Use techniques such as coercion and modeling, incentivization. That's a fantastic one. You know, gamification, incentivizing people, rewarding people, and enablement. But again, the reward depends very much on the communities and the cultural differences that we're talking about, as different motivations are applicable to different types of people. Include cultural factors to encourage intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is something everyone wants, or certainly employers, leaders want their staff to have this. This means that they are, employees are committed intrinsically, they are naturally committed and loyal to that organization, and they're basically willing to go above the call of duty to protect the organization, to work those extra hours, or to go above and beyond what's expected of them. So introducing cultural factors can help encourage this intrinsic motivation to security, tapping into the cognitive, affective, or motivational characteristics. So make it personal, ultimately, and collective. So it's not just about the individual, it's making it personal to the individual, but it's also considering the fact that we need to change cultural norms here. We need to make it relevant to the community, to the organization, to the teams that they're working in. So regulatory focus theory. So this is basically the effectiveness of campaigns can be enhanced by using two types of different messages, prevention and promotion focus. This is really great stuff, because once you get this, then you understand how to shape your messaging so it hits the spot. Basically, individuals are guided for a need for nurturance, They want to feel protected, they want to feel good about themselves, and they want to align with their ideal self. So not necessarily the self they currently are, but the person they want to be. So messages should be promotion and prevention focused and not instill fear. Fear is paralyzing. It doesn't actually necessarily provoke long-term behavior change positively. So we all, communications people, understand about understanding your audience. It's quite critical to any communications campaign. Really, really important that you do that, you know, but not just in terms of their age and gender, but or basic demographics, but also in terms of their cultural beliefs, as we've discussed, and perhaps even their personality types or their needs as a, you know, typical industry related employee, for example. Perceptions of risk. So this is really important. Be aware and counter in the varying perceptions of risk culturally between nations and states. There are 4 distinctive categories, which I won't go into too much today, but essentially it's power distance, collectivism versus individualism, femininity versus masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance. Getting to grips with these perceptions of risk may be too detailed when planning campaigns, but just being aware that they exist can be really, really helpful. So fear, I touched on that already. Refrain from using messages that are fear-provoking. It might get the attention. I like the likes, the tweets, the followers, but it's not actually conducive to behavior change. So interventions that are based on theoretical knowledge, such as social learning theory and the theory of self-efficacy, which take into account cultural beliefs and attitudes, are much more likely to succeed. To basically do your homework, do your research, don't just make assumptions, and bear in mind the cultural inference. Simplicity. Campaigns should use simple, consistent rules of behavior that people can follow, facilitating perceived control and better accepted of the suggested behavior. So, I mean, this is a sort of, you know, shit Sherlock. Everyone knows, you know, you've got to keep it simple. But there is, particularly when you have security professionals planning these campaigns, there's a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology, which are not necessarily well absorbed by the audiences. So getting a non-expert involved in the communications campaign to really pull it back and say, well, actually, what does that mean? And is that consistent what they're saying in the other departments? So keeping it consistent between departments, consistent between all communications materials is fundamental, as well as keeping it very simple. Yes, avoid monotonous advice from security experts, such as change passwords. We've all heard that one a million times, which doesn't really take into account the responsibility element that we talked about earlier, taking personal responsibility, or workload issues that may be present. So basically getting to understand the barriers to your good cyber hygiene is fundamental, rather than just providing monotonous advice that means nothing. Simple thing to do here, but you'll be amazed how many people miss it off. Include contact details, which enable users to call a helpline or get help where possible. I do a lot of research, interviewing people in relation to their thoughts and feelings around cybersecurity and whether the tasks or the expectations are reasonable, etc., etc. And one of the themes that comes through almost every time is that people are a bit unclear about how to report or who to report to. Now, you know, we know that with emergency services, the police, ambulance, that it's very, very important to have a very easy and simple function that enables reporting of any risk or concern. So do keep contact details in your communications campaigns. So, yeah. Basically, feedback. Sorry, I skipped past, but feedback is really incredibly important because it needs to drive your next communications campaign, essentially. You need to listen to what your employees or the citizens, if it's more of a national, European level or international level campaign, but essentially get feedback, get evaluation questionnaires out there, whichever means possible, get feedback, listen to it, and implement it, design the next one, implement it into the next cyber security awareness campaign. So, you know, we're all used to basically using social media metrics to identify whether behavior change has actually occurred. They're very high level. They're a bird's eye view of what's actually happening and not particularly useful, really. So what I would say is, where possible, I appreciate this is not always possible, and it depends on the size of the organization, but behavioral metrics are fundamentally important. So a combination of direct behavioral measures, for example, number of people signing up for training, percentage of people reporting a potential phishing email, which is all very possible if we're talking about organizational level. Hopefully a security department, if it's big enough, will have some sort of data around this, use it, adopt it, marry it to the communications campaign, make sure the content is relevant according to the risk, and report back to measure how that campaign has been effective or not. You can go further than that, actually, and measure the intentions to cybersecurity behavior. So questions on how an individual would act if they find themselves in a potentially harmful situation. So that's really where Anima People does quite a lot of work in looking at the attitudes and the intentions before things go wrong. Actually, what are people's beliefs about cybersecurity? And as I said, attitudes towards the likelihood and severity of cyber threats, such as ransomware, and awareness, the reach of the campaign, whether people remember the message of the campaign material. Don't forget, your campaign does not end the month after it's finished. Your campaign should be long-term strategic plans, and they will need follow-up. So essentially what I'm trying to say is an evidence-based approach to cybersecurity that incorporates various pathways to influence a diverse target group, such as the general population, is the key to the measurement of cybersecurity awareness campaigns. And without that, they're limited in the amount of impact that they can have on the ultimate deliverable of behavior change. So, yeah, we've seen this one before, but that's really me just saying, please give me any feedback. I'm like I've mentioned previously, I value feedback. I think it's very important. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions or feedback for me. And that's the end of the presentation. There's my contact details. Feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much.
Hello, Nadine. That was great. And I see we've got some comments there. So I think without further ado, let's just get right into them. So JJ Davies said, many security experts are introverts and may not have the emotional intelligence to connect with the audience or have the social perception to see how they are responding to what they are delivering. So do you think security experts should work with communication experts to deliver this training?
Yes, I mean, first, there's almost two different questions there. So, so in terms of communications campaigns, it should definitely be a marriage of different departments that are responsible for designing and delivering the campaigns. So basically, I would expect in normal circumstances, security professionals to provide the knowledge, the accuracy over what's happening out in the atmosphere, you know, the environment which requires attention. What's happening internally in terms of behavioral metrics, in terms of phishing simulations, you know, what risks, what incidents are happening, and also the knowledge around the terminology and how to educate them. But it should be people that perhaps are more in tune emotionally with the workforce, that actually provides the input of how to shape the messages, and perhaps to do that research prior to even getting to the stage to find out, well, you know, what is the voice of the organization, of the employee? What are they saying? What do they need? And how is the best way to have that conversation with them?
Yeah, he's just followed up and said he's delivered training in different formats, death by PowerPoint and a more comedy-based format, which he found had much better response from the audience, and they would come over to the security team and engage in conversations, as opposed to the latter, which made users' avoidance to dodge more death by PowerPoint.
Absolutely, but I think there's two things going on here. So I very much say training should be interactive, face-to-face where possible, but computer-based training is of course very effective too. But as interactive, that two-way conversation reinforces the message, repetition. You tap into all those things rather than just PowerPoint, assume everybody understands everything and then run away. But it's important to distinguish between training and communications campaign. They are not both the same thing. Essentially, training is providing the knowledge, you know, whereas the communication is more about sharing the information. So the communication provides the why, it provides the basis on which this is really important. We need to know this because of this. You know, if we don't do this, this might happen. So it's all the discourse, it's providing the framework, the context, why that training is so critical. Without that, then that training will have very little impact, and they're much more reliant on the methods of training delivery, as in making it interactive, because it's a bit lost why they should be there in the first place, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's not enough to just raise awareness of cybersecurity. You have to focus on training rather than the comms campaigns?
So essentially, my kind of mantra is to inform, involve, and inspire. So what you need to try and tick off all those boxes, right? It's not just enough to download a load of information. Doesn't matter if we're talking about a newsletter or we're talking about a training session. We need to involve them in it and then inspire them to walk away with it and actually do something about it. So it doesn't matter on the channel or the method of communication or the delivery of the training. As long as we're covering those three aspects, we have a better chance of actually them walking away and remembering what we've said and actually adopting it into their daily lives.
So, you know, when the corporate world is quite transient, and, you know, the employees, they come and go, you know, how do we ensure the campaign has the impact and they're taking into account design, you know, what they may only experience like part of it, you know, if they're just, I don't know, you can't, is it kind of difficult to do repetition if people are just, you know, if there's a high turnover in employee, you know?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's when people and staff come and go, it's quite difficult to manage the whole campaign from beginning to end, because you don't know how much of it they're actually seeing. They might only see the first half or the second half. And likewise, when people are really busy, you know, they might sort of get lost somewhere, or maybe they'll travel somewhere and lose half of it. I think the key thing to remember is we're not trying to change the behavior of every single individual. It's about creating cultural norms or subjective norms in academia. So what you want to do is try and have enough ambassadors that really set the standard and the expectation, that are doing things right. It's a bit like herd immunity with COVID. You know, when you have enough people that are protective, have protective behaviors, then it's like a, well, it just sort of transfers through other people that come in and out. So if you imagine, sort of, to use a metaphor, at the seashore, a wave. So you've got a big wave coming in, and you've got all the pebbles and stones, the really big, robust ones on the seabed. But when the wave comes in, it takes away all the tiny little ones, all the little shells, and it washes it and dumps it somewhere else completely different. You will always have transient people come and go that sort of end up over there and over there and over there. But the important thing is that you have enough grounding, enough stability in that seabed floor, so that when those people come and go, they are sharing the right messages. They are the ambassadors of cybersecurity and the teachers themselves.
Mm-hmm. So talking about you know, evaluating the success of a security awareness campaign, it usually involves, you know, different social media metrics or web analytics. Is that enough to evaluate the success?
I think they are very, very effective when dealing with very large populations. So, you know, as I said previously, it provides a bird's eye view, very high level idea of who's, I hate to use the word engagement, but if we were to say, you know, who's engaged with that content. So in terms of web analytics, landing pages, for example, tweets, you know, all those sorts of things. But it doesn't answer the whole story. I think that's the problem with, so it doesn't actually tell you, have people engaged with it positively or negatively? They might have seen it, they might have tweeted it, liked it, or followed it, or actually visited a landing page, but they might have hated it. They might have thought, this is a load of rubbish, you know, I'm not going to listen to any of this. Now, I mean, there are some media monitoring tools out there that do use something called sentiment analysis, which does look at whether it's been received positively or negatively. Well, it sort of tries to do that in a sort of way by analyzing language and categorizing it. But it doesn't, again, get to the nitty gritty of what are people's thoughts and feelings and beliefs? What are their intentions? Will they actually adopt this behavior or will they not? You know, have they actually seen the campaign? And what do they think of it? Is it something they think is good or not good? You know, these are the sorts of questions that we need to ask, which are not covered by social media metrics.
And for anyone in the comments, please get your questions in down below. We're sort of winding down now, so we're taking the final questions. Here's one for you. Who should be responsible for designing the awareness campaigns?
Well, it really depends on the size of the organization involved. But it should be a collaboration between multiple parties. As I said previously, you know, someone with real technical knowledge, someone with more emotional, more in tune with what's happening internally, culturally within the organization. I quite like to involve HR where possible. It's not an obvious one, but they have quite good insight into the dimensions of what's happening internally in an organization, beyond the sort of obvious risk of incident or how to shape a message. So they can often add quite a really good depth into a communications campaign. But ultimately, it should be a collaboration between different experts.
Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up. I think we're about time now. I'd just like to thank you, Nadine, for your talk, and everyone in the comments, obviously. This one's, I felt, was really quite good. Yeah, we probably have another event in a week, but we're waiting for confirmation on that. So we will get more information shortly. For any of you interested in the live broadcast of this will be on our YouTube channel, West Point Cyber Talent, at around 12 o'clock today, the full edited thing and everything. And for anyone interested in the slides, Nadine, maybe you'd like to send slides over, and we can share them with anyone who wants them. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. And thank you again for your talk, Nadine.
Thanks, Oscar. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.